Hey, good morning. How are we? Let's go. Come on, Doxa. Love it. Hey, glad to be here with you guys together today. My name is Chris Cummings. I'm the lead pastor here at Doxa. And if today is your first day with us, I also want to say thank you so much for trusting us with your Sunday morning. We do hope and pray that this place will feel like home for you very easily. On your way in, you should have received a program. It looks like this. On one side is a list of announcements. At the bottom of that section is a little connect card. And today is your first day with us. We would love the opportunity to connect with you and to help you get connected as well. And the best way for us to be able to do that is to fill out that card. Once you fill it out, you can tear it off the bottom and do one of two things with it. You can either put it in the offering baskets when they get passed later on in the service, or you can take it to our connections lobby. That's right when you first walk in. That's where our team will be after the service is over. And we just love the chance to get to meet you, introduce ourselves to you, and give you a gift. Say thank you for joining us today. And so again, we are incredibly glad that you are here with us this morning. And for me personally, I'm really glad to be here with you. Over the last 3 weeks, my wife and I and our family got to take some time to really just travel and rest and kind of recharge as we kind of enter into this next ministry year. And let me just start off by saying this. It was just an absolute incredible gift. I am so beyond grateful for this church, for our team. Incredibly grateful for Jonathan and Joe and Mark, who all stepped in and just gave us some time to really just take a breath of fresh air. And so I'm just incredibly grateful. But I'm excited to be back together with you guys today. While we were traveling, one of the things that my wife and I got to do was back in April, we celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary. Come on, let's go. And so to celebrate 10 years together, we decided to take 10 days in Italy. That was a trip that we've always wanted to take. We finally did it for our 10-year anniversary. And during that trip, we spent 3 full days in Rome. And let me just tell you this, if you get a chance to go to Rome, go to Rome. It is a pretty surreal experience. And there was a moment as we're kind of walking through the Colosseum and the Roman Forum where all of a sudden, I realized, I'm standing in the city that used to be the capital of the greatest empire on the planet. And at one point in time, it was hell-bent on destroying Christianity and persecuting Christians. And now Christianity, centuries later, is thriving and taking ground on every corner of the globe. And I paid $100 to walk through its ruins. How amazing is that? That when Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, he meant it. And he is faithful to see it happen. And it was an amazing experience. And I tell you that because today we come to a significant milestone in our series through the book of Hebrews. Today we end the most famous chapter of this book. We end chapter 11. And what the author's been doing all throughout chapter 11 is giving us example after example after example of men and women in the Old Testament that faithfully endured to the end. And the reason he gives us these examples is to show us what it looks like for us to also faithfully endure to the end. And at this particular moment in this chapter, the author's done kind of giving all these different names of people in the Old Testament, but he's not done describing what has happened in the Old Testament by faith. And one of the things that he writes, and he says at the very end of this chapter, is that by faith there were those who stopped the mouths of lions. And many commentators and many theologians, that they study this passage, agree that this statement points in a lot of ways to Daniel and what God did through him as he was thrown into the den of lions. And today we're going to step into that story. And as we look at the story of Daniel, what we're going to find is that Daniel is someone who was also living in the midst of an empire that was incredibly hostile towards the people of God. And yet what Daniel did was he stood firm and he remains faithful to his God. And as a result, not only did he stand firm, but the gospel continued to take ground in his day. And the glory of God was shown not only all across the empire, but to the ends of the earth. And as we step into this story, here's my hope for us. My hope is that we'd be able to get a glimpse of what it looks like for us to, in our day to day, to truly stand firm and also take gospel ground along with it. You see, when it comes to the kind of culture in America, what many people have been doing is describing that culture largely with the terminology of it being post-Christian. And that idea of post-Christian is this idea that at one point, while America was founded on Christian morals and beliefs and values, that now we're at a spot where many believe that Christianity and that even God himself is something that's kind of in the rear view mirror. Like it's behind us, it's in our past, it's not in our future. In fact, one author describes this post-Christian mentality as an anti-God posture. That's the idea. And in Tucson, Arizona, we're by no means immune to that. In fact, one study back in 2019 said that Tucson is the 16th most post-Christian city in America. We're not immune to this. And maybe you're someone in the room that maybe you felt this. Like you got friends or family members or coworkers or whatever, and there's some hostility towards the gospel and towards the God that you believe. And for many of us, maybe we're asking the question, how can we live in a world like this that's maybe growing more and more and more in hostility towards what it is that we believe? Well, the story of Daniel is going to show us what it looks like to truly stand firm, but not just stand firm, but to declare the glory of God and to take ground in the name of the gospel. And my hope for us is that as we learn that we can apply that to our lives and that we would be a church too, that we would stand firm and shine gospel light to the ends of the earth. So if you have a Bible with you, go and open up to the book of Daniel. We're gonna be in Daniel chapter 6 together today, looking at almost the entire chapter. Daniel chapter 6, if you need to use your table of contents to find it, no worries. It's a little tricky to find. If you don't have a Bible with you, also no worries. All the verses on the screen behind me so that you can easily follow along. And if you don't own like a physical copy of God's word, we'd love to give you one. You can visit our hospitality kiosk or our connections lobby before you leave today. Daniel chapter 6, we're gonna start in verse 1. We're gonna look at almost the entirety of the chapter. But before we do, we gotta do a quick little history lesson, so that we know where we are in light of the Old Testament. And so what we've seen is that as the nation of Israel gets established, they begin to establish kings. And over the course of time, eventually the nation of Israel splits into two kingdoms. You have the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Both of those kingdoms will eventually get hauled off into exile. The kingdom of Israel will get hauled off by the Assyrians, and the kingdom of Judah will get conquered and hauled off by the Babylonians. Whenever they are conquered, Daniel is one of those exiles that gets hauled off and now is living under Babylonian rule. But as Daniel's living under the Babylonian Empire, eventually God raises up another nation to conquer the Babylonians. He raises up the Persians. And now Daniel finds himself yet again in a foreign land under foreign rule, now under the Persian Empire. And that's the scene in which we open up with in Daniel chapter 6. Let's start in verse 1. Here's what it says. It says, it pleased Darius, the king of the Persian Empire, to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground or complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. As we open up, what we see all throughout the book of Daniel is that Daniel is constantly positioned in places of great influence and power. Even under Babylonian rule, he was in a phenomenal position of great influence. And now under the Persian rule, he finds himself in the same spot. He is one of only 3 high officials. And as you can clearly tell, he is the greatest of the 3. That he's clearly rising up to the top. It says that he is distinguished, that the king himself was planning on giving Daniel control of the entire kingdom. That's how much favor Daniel was now winning with this Persian pagan king. And as Daniel is earning favor with the king, you can clearly see that he's losing favor with his coworkers. They are becoming incredibly jealous and envious of Daniel. And the reason why they now begin to hate Daniel is not because Daniel cheated them or did anything wrong to them or had that kind of like snarky tone with them or any of those kind of things. It was simply because Daniel was getting favor. Daniel was receiving what they wanted. You see, at this point in time, Daniel is like that athlete that we love to hate just because they win all the time. You know what I'm talking about? Like, remember years ago, whenever like Tom Brady and the New England Patriots were just dominating left and right, like every Super Bowl, they were in it and they won like half of them at the same time. And they would show that map on ESPN of like what states were rooting for which teams in the Super Bowl. And it was like Massachusetts is rooting for New England. And then like everyone else is rooting against New England. Like we don't even care who they're playing. It's just we want someone else to win. That's Daniel at this moment. Daniel is not hated because he's done anything wrong. It's not his character. He didn't cheat them to rise to the top. What's happening is that Daniel's earning favor and his coworkers despise him for it. They're jealous and they're envious because of it. And so what they decide to do is they gather together and they create a plan. And they said, we got to go find dirt on this Daniel. If they were going to run a negative political ads, they would have done it, right? That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to find dirt on him, and they're thinking in their head, there's got to be dirt on him because there's no way he's better than us, and we know there's dirt in us. So they try to go find up some dirt on him, and they can't find any of it. They look high and low, far and wide, and they cannot find anything to pin against him. They can't bring any accusation to the king. Daniel has been faithful both to the king and to his God. And they know they have no ground to bring to the king. And so what they do, they just devise a plan. They know that Daniel's faithful to his God, and they think that the best way to trap him is to use his faithfulness against him. And that's exactly what they try to do. Look at verse 6. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or any man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. Daniel's enemies know that they can't trap him because he has been faithful to the king. He has followed every law to their understanding. And so what they do is they create a law that they know that Daniel will break. And the law states that if any person in the empire is found to bring petition, that refers to requests or prayers to anyone, any god or any man except for the king, should be thrown into the den of lions. And as they bring this request to the king, they frame it up in order to appeal to the king's pride. They are literally telling the king at this moment, hey, king, you're so great. You're so good. You're so mighty. You're so handsome that you should be God to us. That everyone should pray to you, bow down to you, bring their request to you. That's the appeal. And here's the thing. Whenever the king heard that, the king should have known that something was up. He should have detected that there was something fishy about this decree. Because here's the thing, this decree is absolutely absurd. It is an impossible command and law that anyone should be able to follow. No one should be able to do this. Like, think about this for a moment. The law said anyone that brought a request to anybody but the king would be thrown into the den of lions. That's ridiculous. Does that mean like a neighbor can't go to his neighbor and ask for help? Because that would be a request. They'd be thrown into the den of lions? Can a child not go to his father and ask for something? without being thrown into the den of lions? Even if you wanted to go to the king and bring your request to the king has got guards and officials. Guess who you have to talk to before you get to the king? Them. And what do you got to do? Ask them to go to the king. You can't even get to them. It's an absurd request. And not only that, but it is clearly deceptive. Here comes the high officials. There's only 3 of them. They come to the king, 2 of them, and they say, hey, king, all of us agree that this is what should happen. Really, all of us? You notice that someone's missing from the meeting? I don't know, the 3rd high official? You don't recognize that? The king should have known that this was a law out to get Daniel. He should have known. He should have been able to see it clearly. And yet he doesn't. And he signs it into law. Why? Because the king in that moment was blinded by his own pride. The appeal to not just be king, but to be God was far too good for the king to pass up. And blinded by his own pride, he couldn't see the clear and obvious deception that was happening. And before we judge the king a little too harshly here, here's what we need to recognize. We need to recognize that this is us. It's us. Every sin that we fall into is ultimately an appeal to your pride. Every single sin whispers in your ear that you deserve this, that it'll satisfy you, that it'll somehow, some way make you great. Every sin in our life appeals to our pride. C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest influential authors of all time, once described pride as the sin that makes the devil the devil. It's the great sin of humanity, he says. He goes on to say that it is the sin underneath every other sin. Every sin that we commit ultimately appeals to our pride. Just think about Adam and Eve, right? In the Garden of Eden, how does the serpent deceive them? It's through the means of pride. Eat from this tree and you will be godlike. It's the same thing that the king right here is falling into. For the king, the appeal to be God and not just king was too good to pass up. And without his ability to see through the lies and the deception, he signs it into law. And now all of a sudden, Daniel is really in a really awkward spot. Up to this point, Daniel's been able to be faithful both to his God and to his king. But now, he won't be able to. Now, he's got to choose. If he follows the king's decree, he will no longer be faithful to his God. If he remains faithful to his God and ignores the king's decree, he will no longer be faithful to his king. He has to choose. And as the tension rises in this story, the big question that comes with it is, what will Daniel do? Verse 10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. As the king signs this into law, as the document is signed, and as Daniel knows about it, he's not ignorant here. He's aware of what's happening. What changes about Daniel's life? Nothing. The Bible tells us that he does what he's always done. He goes to his home, to the exact same room, in front of the same window that's opened in the same direction, and he gets down on his knees 3 times and he prays as he's always done. Nothing changes about his life whatsoever. He continues to do everything exactly the same, even though he knew that it was putting him in harm's way. Even though he knew that. And just think about this for a moment. The persecution that's now headed straight towards Daniel could have been easily avoided. Like, he could have remained faithful to his God while at the same time dodging the persecution that's coming to him, couldn't he? I don't know the PTO policy in the Persian Empire, But if Daniel had some days, now's a good time to get them, right? Like, go on a vacation, bro. Like, I just went to Italy. It's nice. Go over there. It's only a 30-day decree. It's not a lifetime ban. Just go on vacation. Or here, I don't know, here's an idea, crazy idea. Shut the windows, Daniel. Just close them. You'll be fine. There's nothing in the Bible that says people who pray with windows open are more holier than those that don't. There's nothing that says God hears your prayers better when your windows are open. None of that is in there. He could have closed the windows and privately kept his devotion to God. In fact, in today's world, if you were to look at the persecuted church across the world, right now there are millions of Christians globally who are being constantly persecuted for their faith. In other words, they live in countries and in regions where it is illegal to follow Jesus. And if they are found out, for some of them, they'll get jail time, but for many of them, they will die for their faith. And I heard a story recently of this one particular church in this one particular region where they could potentially die for their own faith. And what they would do is, as they would gather together as the church, they would tell every member of the church to take different routes to get to the church to not draw suspicion. They would also tell them to arrive at different times. Like, you had a window that you arrived. Again, to not draw suspicion. And as they would gather with the windows closed and the doors locked. And they would be handed a sheet of paper that had the music they were going to sing together. And in full hearts, they would worship together in silence. The person leading them in worship would just conduct them with a whisper, 1, 2. And they would whisper the glories of God to each other, declaring his excellencies, gathering together in worship and gathering together in secret. And the stories that come out of that place is that people would walk away weeping because of the glory of God that they encountered. And I don't think any single one of us would look at what they're doing and say they're unfaithful to God. They are risking their lives to gather together as the church. We have a hard time coming when we stayed up too late on Saturday. They're risking their lives together. No one would say they're unfaithful. And so all Daniel had to do was close the windows, and he'd be able to avoid all the coming conflict. And yet Daniel, knowing what the king had done, knowing what the king had signed, changes nothing about his life. He does what he did every single day. Why? Here's the thing. I think Daniel knew what the king should have known. I think Daniel knew this decree was after him, that this decree was meant for him. And because of that, I think he knew two things. I think he knew that the enemies would be watching him, but I also think he knew that the eyes of the nation would be watching him. You see, Daniel had a reputation around the Persian Empire, and that reputation was a really good one. It was that he was faithful to his God. That's why they write this law. And he knew that everyone would be watching. And with the eyes of the empire on him, he knew that in that moment, he had to step forward in courage. And he knew that if he were to remain faithful to God, that his glory would be magnified through it. I love the way that biblical commentator Matthew Henry puts it. He writes this. He says, if he, talking about Daniel, had done so, that means like to hide himself in this moment. It would have been thought, both by his friends and by his enemies, that he had thrown up the duty for this time through cowardice and base fear, which would have tended very much to the dishonor of God and the discouragement of his friends. He writes, others who moved in a lower sphere might well enough act with caution, but Daniel, who had so many eyes on him, must act with courage, and the rather because he knew that the law, when it was made, was particularly leveled against him. There was no doubt that there were some Jewish families at this point in time that when they heard this law be written, that they closed the windows and locked the doors and continued to pray to their God in private. And that's okay. But Daniel, with all these eyes on him, knew that he couldn't do it. He knew that he had to remain faithful. And he knew that if he remained faithful to God, that God would remain faithful to him. And sure enough, as Daniel does what he always does, the eyes of the nation are watching him, including his enemies. And his enemies sees what he does, and they go run and they go tell the king. And as the king hears the words spoken to him of what Daniel has done, the king does not respond in anger. The king responds in anguish. Look at verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement in one accord to the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunctions or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." The news about Daniel makes its way to the king's ears. And the king does not respond in anger against Daniel. How dare he do this to me? He responds in anguish. And the king now tries to do everything in his power to change the fate of Daniel. Here you have the most powerful person in the most powerful empire on the planet trying to change the fate of his most beloved advisor, and he can't do anything. He is helpless. He is hopeless. His resources, his power can't help. Here, the king who wanted divine honor turns out to have no divine power. The king begins to realize that even though he wants to be God, he makes a terrible God. He can't do it. And so the king reluctantly does what he doesn't want to do. Verse 16, then the king commanded that Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. The king does what he is reluctant to do. He delivers Daniel over to go into the den of lions. But as he does, notice that the king still has a little glimmer of hope. Now this king, who wanted to be God, starts to cry out to the one true God. And he looks at Daniel and he says, "I can't deliver you, but may your God, who you serve, continually deliver you." And as the story unfolds, that's exactly what happens. Verse 19, then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Here we see something I find incredibly ironic. Here, on that night, you have a king in his palace who cannot sleep whatsoever, filled with anxiety, filled with anguish for his beloved advisor. He's tossing and turning and cannot sleep. And then, not too far away from the king's palace, you have Daniel in the midst of lions. And Daniel that night didn't have a better night of his life. And as the king runs over to the den, he cries out to Daniel, "Has your God saved you?" And Daniel responds and he says, "Yes, my God has not only shut the mouths of the lions, but he has sent his angel to be with me." In that moment, in a dark, terrifying, dreadful den, the glory of God shone all around Daniel to bring him peace and to bring him comfort. And as the king hears these words, he immediately tells him to roll the stone away to get Daniel out of the den, and he throws his accusers and his enemies in. And notice that before they could even get to the bottom of the floor of the den, the lions overpower them, which show us the reason why Daniel was rescued that night was not because those lions just didn't happen to be hungry. The reason he was rescued that night was because God stepped into the dark and dreadful den. And here's the best news about Daniel. The best news is centuries later, God's gonna step in to an even greater den, the den of sin and death. You see, Jesus, just like Daniel, had conspirators conspiring against him. Jesus, just like Daniel, his accusers could find no fault in him. Jesus, just like Daniel, was brought before a king even though he was innocent and did nothing wrong. Jesus, just like Daniel, was thrown into a den or into a tomb right after he was crucified on the cross for our sins. Jesus, just like Daniel, had a stone be rolled in front of the tomb and sealed with the king's signet. And Jesus, just like Daniel, 3 days later would walk out of the tomb alive. But Jesus, very much unlike Daniel, does not enter the den with a need to be rescued and delivered. He goes into the den to be the deliverer. He doesn't go into the den with the need of salvation. He goes into the den of sin and death to bring salvation for all who put their faith in him. That's our God. Our God does not just lower a rope from heaven hoping that we can climb up. We worship a God who steps into the midst of the dark, dreadful den to rescue us out. That's our God. That's who he is. And whenever you begin to realize that's who he is, there's only one proper way to respond, and that is with adoration and praise. And that's how the book of Daniel ends. The book of Daniel ends with worship. But here's the thing, it's not the worship of Daniel. It's not the praise of Daniel saying, God, thank you for delivering me. It's the worship of a pagan king. Look at these last few verses with me real quick. It says, then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. The way this story ends is it ends with praise. As the king declares praise literally to the ends of the earth, he writes to all the nations on the earth, declaring what God has done for Daniel. And the reason why this story ends in this way is because when Daniel knew the king's decree, he did not shut the windows. He continued to do what he had always done. Daniel, in this moment, lives out what Jesus tells us to do in Matthew chapter 5, to shine our light before others so they may give glory to our God in heaven. That's what he does. And so here's the thing. Here's the reality. If you are in this room and you have put your faith in Jesus, the reality is that there is someone watching the way that you live out your faith. And as they watch how you live out your faith, they are drawing conclusions to who God is. They are learning something about God. The question is not whether or not anyone is watching. No matter how many times you try to close the windows, someone's watching. The question is whether or not, if someone is watching, the question is what are they learning about the God that you serve? Parents, make no mistake. Your kids are watching. They're watching the way you pursue God. They're watching the way that you love your spouse. They're watching your prayer life. They're watching all these things. The question is, what are they learning about your God? Your coworkers are watching. Your neighbors are watching. What are they learning? That's the big question. See, I think for many of us, when we face the lions of our own lives, we begin to act more like the king than we do like Daniel. The king tries to solve all the problems himself, thinks that he can do it all himself, tries to fix what his sin is broken. The king's up all night, anxious, restless. Why? Because the king is trying to be his own God. And then you look at Daniel. Daniel seems to be calm, peaceful. In fact, we don't see Daniel say a single word until after the king comes to the den to see if he's okay. Daniel's at peace. Why? Because in that moment, he chose to continue to trust his God. Daniel didn't do anything special. He did what he did day after day after day. And if we're going to be people that stand firm to magnify the glory of God to the ends of the earth, what we have to do is, like Daniel, we have to cultivate ordinary faithfulness in our lives, day after day. We can't wait until the crisis comes to then call upon the name of the Lord. It's got to be ordinary faithfulness every single day. Your greatest preparation for tomorrow's trials is today's obedience. And as a church, if we can cultivate private devotion to God, it will lead to the public display of his glory in Tucson and to the ends of the earth. And so let's be that church. That when we are faced with the lions, that we continue to cling to Christ like we have always done. Let me pray.